Several years ago, I was out for a run, and this was maybe 15 years ago or so, but I would typically take the same route, and I would run through the neighborhood, through my neighborhood, and then I would go into the next neighborhood, and then I would come out at the main entrance to the subdivision and where the main road was, and then I would turn around and I would go back home the way that I came. Well, this evening, as I was running, I came out to the main road, and I noticed there's a sidewalk, a new sidewalk. They had just built a sidewalk, and I thought, I'm just going to take the new sidewalk. So I started running down the sidewalk, and I was probably about 3/4 of the way from the entrance to the neighboring addition to the entrance to our addition, and the sidewalk abruptly ended. It wasn't there. Now, at that point, there were several things that should have clued me in on the dangers that lay ahead. There was a sign there, said, "Construction zone, keep out." Construction equipment. It was dark. There weren't any street lights. I couldn't see much of anything. But I didn't want to turn around and go all the way back. So what do you think I did? You think I kept going, or you think I turned around? To be continued. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But today we're going to talk about the prudence in seeing the dangers that lie ahead in life and then doing something about it. That's what we're going to discuss today. As we close out our series on the book of Proverbs, we've been spending some time. This is week number 7, learning the way of wisdom in the book of Proverbs, and we've been looking at some of the most famous and well-loved Proverbs. Let me just go through the ones that we've looked at again. Proverbs 9:10, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." It's the foundation of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. We looked at Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 that Brian talked about earlier. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. And in all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Proverbs 4:23, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." And that's my favorite. Proverbs 18:21, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." We looked at Proverbs 25:28, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." Last week, Brian led us through this proverb, 27, verse 17, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." And so I asked you, what has been your favorite proverb so far in this series? And a couple weeks ago, I asked, for you to kind of share your favorite proverb of all, but of this series, of the proverbs that we have gone through, what has been your favorite? Or maybe what is one takeaway, just one takeaway from the series? If you've been around and you've been through the series, and if you're sitting next to somebody or you came with someone this morning, turn to them right now and discuss this. What was your favorite proverb? Maybe one takeaway. And if you're watching online, participate as well. We'd love for you to type your proverb in the comments. If you don't have anything to share, you have no idea what your favorite one is, you can just say, "They were all my favorite." Or you can just discuss what you're going to have for lunch. That would be okay too. So spend some time now. Well, today we're going to take a look at Proverbs 22, verse 3, as we close out our series. Now, this exact same proverb is found in chapter 27, verse 12. It's word for word the same proverb, chapter 27, verse 12, or 22, verse 3. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Will you read this with me? The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. So back in the days of Scripture, they would travel from place to place. They didn't have the modes of transportation that we have nowadays, planes and trains and automobiles, and they'd have to travel on foot or by donkey, or if they were wealthy, they would be able to travel on horseback. And so there were a lot of dangers while they were traveling from place to place, especially long distances. They would have to be cautious. They would have to examine the route that they were going to take and try to avoid the dangers ahead. Maybe one thing that comes to mind is Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. He talks about how the man was traveling and he was attacked by robbers and he was left for dead. And that was kind of common back in those days. There were dangers, especially dangers from robbers along the road. So travelers had to be prudent. And maybe this is what Solomon had in mind as he was writing this proverb, as he was speaking this proverb. He said there are two types of people, maybe two types of travelers: a prudent person and a simple person. There's a prudent person. The prudent person, and prudent means crafty. Sometimes it means shrewd, someone who's sensible, someone who has good sense. This word prudent is really closely related to wisdom. The prudent person is a wise person. And so there's a prudent person. There's a prudent traveler who decides the best route ahead of time and scans the horizon, decides that he or she's going to avoid the pitfalls along the way, maybe decides to avoid the routes that have tougher terrain, or decides to avoid the routes where there are hiding places where a robber could hide along the road, along the way. The prudent person decides that he or she is going to travel in a large group, which is what they do back in that day because there is safety in numbers, right? And the prudent person, the person who is being prudent, is more likely to arrive at his destination on time and safely, right? But then there's a simple person. There's a simple traveler. Simple means naive, someone who lacks sense, someone who's open to influences, mostly negative influences, someone who is foolish. So there's a foolish traveler who does none of these things that the prudent person does. Pays no attention to what dangers may lurk in the distance, just keeps on going, takes no precautions ahead of time, and then when that person runs into trouble, it's kind of too late. There isn't anything for them to do. They aren't prepared. They pay the price. They end up bloodied and bruised, or even worse, and might not even end up at the destination that they had planned in the first place. And so there's a huge contrast between the prudent person and the simple person. And so this morning I want to explore that contrast a little bit further, and I want to apply it to our travels. And I'm not talking about our upcoming travels for the holiday season. I'm talking about our travels along this highway of life, which we mentioned at the beginning of the series when we started. Life's a highway, right? I want to drive it all night long. So, are you wise? Are you foolish? Are you prudent? Or are you simple? Let's explore it a little bit more. First of all, the prudent look to the future, while the simple live in the moment. The prudent look to the future, while the simple live in the moment. The prudent hath seen evil. This is the Young's translation, the word for word, the literal translation. The prudent hath seen the evil and is hidden, hath seen it, has already seen it. It's not like they're waiting till it's right there in front of their face. They've seen it. And also the King James Version says, a prudent man foreseeth the evil. They see what's coming ahead. They don't wait till it's right there in front of their face. The prudent is able to look to the future, look down the road in the distance. What will happen if I continue along this path? What will happen if I continue living in this direction? What will happen if I continue doing the same thing? Doing the same thing that I'm doing. In other words, the wise person, the simple person, the sensible person, or the prudent person recognizes that decisions of today have an impact on tomorrow. My decisions and my actions of today, in the here and now, right in this moment, have an impact on my future. The prudent person is able to stop and evaluate. If I continue playing video games all night long and I avoid doing my homework, I avoid studying for the test that I have the next day, maybe I continue playing video games more than doing my schoolwork, I keep putting my schoolwork off, then I'm probably somewhere down the road, maybe I'm going to be 30 years old someday and I'm still going to be playing video games, but it's going to be in the basement of my parents' home. But if I buckle down and I do my work and I do my best, I apply myself, I'm going to learn about hard work. I'm going to learn to do my best. Somewhere down the road, I'm going to probably have more options available for colleges and for a career someday. If I continue eating fast food day after day, just eating junk food, eating whatever I want, and just ignoring my health and not exercising, then someday along the route, I'm going to end up with health problems. I'm going to end up overweight. I might end up with diabetes. But if I begin right now doing something about my health and deciding to eat healthy, say no to fast food every day, which is my problem sometimes, then more than likely, then I'm going to have better health down the road. I'm going to live a longer and healthier life. If I continue spending, just buying whatever I want, I really want that. I really need that. We say that all the time, right? If I ignore saving, then somewhere along the road I'm going to run into debt. I'm going to possibly become obsessed with things and money and possessions. But if I take charge of my spending here and now, I begin saving, maybe I even begin prioritizing giving, then tomorrow, in the future, I'll have more financial freedom. I'll be able to master my money instead of being enslaved by it. We can keep going, right? If as a married person I continue flirting with that coworker, maybe staying longer and longer after work when people are leaving, if I continue getting emotionally involved, that's a recipe for disaster, right? It's a recipe for an affair. It's a recipe for adultery. It's a recipe for a wrecked marriage somewhere down the road. The decisions of today, my actions of today, have an impact on my tomorrow. And this is so obvious, right? I mean, it's so simple and obvious. We know this, but, very few people are prudent in this way. Many people are simple. They live in the moment. They live for the gratification or the benefit of the here and now, and they're not able to make a connection, or maybe they refuse to make the connection, or they don't care to connect their current decisions, their current actions with the future consequences. They don't take into considerations what dangers may lie ahead. and they just keep moving in the same direction. And often their futures are messed up. Their futures are ruined. At best, they're hindered, and they don't wind up where they want to be in life because of decisions made beforehand, maybe even years before. And a prudent person also recognizes that my decisions of today, my actions of today, impact not only me, but they often impact people in my life. People that I'm usually most close to. Family members, maybe it's a spouse. My decisions of today oftentimes impact my future family members, my future spouse. This is one of the most important things to teach kids when they're young, to teach teenagers. It's one of the most important things for all of us to learn and to wrap our minds around, to recognize that decisions of today have an impact on tomorrow. And that's what the prudent person does. The prudent look to the future, but the simple live in the moment. Are you prudent or are you simple? The prudent also decide ahead of time. The simple wait until danger arrives. You remember the days when we didn't have GPS on our phones? And I mean, some of you can remember those days. Some of you can't. But there used to be a time where we had to use maps. Not the app on your phone, Maps, but actually a paper map. And you had to open it up and trace your route in advance and figure out where you wanted to go ahead of time. But even nowadays, when you have the GPS on your phone, you have to look at the route ahead of time, and you have to kind of decide what route you're going to take. And that's often the problem I have. When we're on vacation, we're on a road trip, I just put in the address and I hit go, and I just listen to whatever they tell me to do. Left here, right there, keep going straight, whatever. And then we wind up stuck in traffic, which is really cool nowadays. That you can look at the GPS and you can look at the route in advance, and you can see where there is construction, where there might be delays. You can see where there might be an accident. And I often fail to do that, and then it's too late. We're just stuck in traffic. But it's the same thing with life's decisions, life's direction, and life's destination. You have to determine ahead of time where you want to be in life, where you want to be financially, where you want to be relationally, in your marriage, where you want to be, as a parent, where you want to be with your kids someday, with your career, so that you're able to take the best route possible, and you're able to avoid the messes, avoid the pitfalls, avoid the dangers, so that you can get where you want to be. You can arrive there safely. You can arrive there on time. The prudent person understands that waiting until danger has arrived is too late. It's often too late to decide. Once again, we can read this statement and we think this is so obvious and it's so simple. But we don't often think about this. When you're stopped in traffic, it's too late. When the danger is upon you, it's too late. If you want to be a loving and faithfully devoted spouse, you have to decide that ahead of time, not when you're alone with a coworker after hours. As a teenager, if you want to be sexually pure, you have to decide that ahead of time, not when you're in the back seat with your boyfriend or girlfriend. If you want to be financially free and in control of your money, and maybe even generous with your money, be able to help those in need someday, you have to make that decision ahead of time, not once you already have racked up a lot of credit card debt, right? If you want to control your eating, you don't wait. You don't decide you decide ahead of time. You don't wait until the piece of cake is right in front of your face, right? It's so simple. But waiting until danger has arrived is often too late. to decide. The prudent person, once again, is forward thinking, is able to decide ahead of time. Where do I want to be in life? Financially, relationally, where do I want to be in my walk with the Lord? In these other important areas of life, where do I want to be? What do I value most over what I sometimes want right now in the moment? The prudent person decides ahead of time, but the simple wait until danger has arrived. And then if you wait until the danger has arrived, it's so much harder. And in a lot of cases, it's too late at that point. So are you prudent or are you simple? Finally, the prudent take precautions, but the simple suffer the consequences. Let me read the proverb again. The prudent see danger and take refuge. They take refuge. Let me read it once again in the Young's translation. The prudent hath seen evil and is hidden. They're protected. They're safe. I want to read it in the Message because I like this. A prudent person sees trouble coming and ducks. A simpleton walks in blindly and is clobbered. I really like that. The prudent person takes refuge, is hidden, is safe, is protected, ducks for cover. The prudent person actually avoids the danger altogether when possible. The prudent person is able to stop, evaluate, look to the future, decide where they want to be, determine their destination, and see where the dangers may lie along the road, where they may be weak, where they may be tempted to stray from the path. They take the necessary precautions. Some call these guardrails. And the guardrails are along the highway, right? To keep us from danger, to keep us from going over the edge, which is where the danger lies, right? When I was a children's pastor for many years, the curriculum that we used, we had 3 foundational principles that we taught the kids every single week. And as we would teach the Bible stories, as we would teach the scriptures to the kids, we would come back to these 3 foundational principles over and over and over again. The first one was, I can trust God no matter what. We wanted the kids to know that from the time they were young, that I can trust Him. I can trust Him and I can trust His Word no matter what. The second principle was, I need to treat others the way I want to be treated. Obviously so important that our trust in God impacts how we treat the people around us. And then the third principle that we would teach them is I need to make the wise choice. I need to make the wise choice. We didn't talk to them about making good choices over bad choices, right choices over wrong choices. We didn't even talk to them about sinful choices. We focused on wise choices. And that's actually what the Scriptures is all about. The Scriptures is helping us to conform to the image of Jesus and helping us to make wise choices. Why wise? Why wisdom? Well, I think we know this, right? But people want to know where the line is, right? What's sin and what isn't sin? I want to know, is this sin or it's not sin? Where is the line? And once I know where the line is, then I'm going to go as close as possible. I'm going to get to the edge of it just because I know that I'm all good. If that's sin and this isn't, then I'm good. Where's the edge? Where's the line? Oftentimes we want to go to the very edge. But the prudent person says, I'm going to make the wise choice. And I'm going to put precautions in place to avoid the danger altogether. I'm going to take a different route so that I avoid the danger completely. I'm not even going to go close to the edge. I'm going to stay back as far as possible. I heard a story just this week from another pastor. He was talking about how he was counseling someone with a pornography addiction. And he was talking with a man, and he had built a really close relationship with a man. And finally, he had met with him and his wife several times. And he said, "Give me your phone." And he took the man's smartphone, took the SIM card out of it, handed the SIM card to him and said, you need to go to Walmart and you need to get a dumb phone. I'm taking your phone. He talked to the wife. They had the Wi-Fi, the internet, disabled in the home. And having a smartphone, that's not a sin, right? There's nothing wrong with having a smartphone. There's nothing wrong with having Wi-Fi and internet. But for that man, the wise thing to do was to stay as far away as possible. It's not a sin to be in the office alone with a coworker when you're married, right? But maybe the wise thing to do, maybe the guardrail or the precaution that you need to take is to decide ahead of time you're never going to do that. Maybe you're going to call your spouse and let them know that you're on the way. Maybe you have a friend that will meet you after work and you can walk out together. It's not a sin to, as a teenager, to be alone with someone of the opposite sex, but because where you want to be somewhere down the road, because of the destination where you're headed, the relationships in the future, you may need to take an extra precaution to do more group dating. Decide never to be alone. There's nothing wrong with being alone, but it might be wise, it might be prudent for you to make that decision. It's not a sin to use credit cards, but if you see that as a danger for you, then you may need to take the precaution of cutting up your cards, only using cash. That's wise, that's prudent. That's avoiding the danger altogether. That's ducking for cover. And here's the third obvious statement of the morning. It's much better to avoid the danger altogether. A prudent person realizes that. It's much better. And it's wise to avoid the danger altogether because of where you ultimately want to be in life. Financially, relationally, in your marriage and your other relationships and your walk with the Lord. Now, you can't always do this, right? I mean, you can't always avoid the danger. You can't always see what's coming. You can't always see where the temptations may lie, but oftentimes you can. Oftentimes you can be prudent and you can see where the dangers lie. And you can take the necessary precautions because it's so much better. It's so much better to deal with it in advance through guardrails of wisdom, through precautions. It's wise. It's prudent. It's so much better to avoid the danger altogether. And that's what a prudent person does. A prudent person takes precautions, but the simple suffer consequences. Suffer consequences. And the simple person often looks back with regret. The prudent person is able to look forward. The simple person looks back with regret oftentimes. So back to my running story. I come to the end of the sidewalk. The sign's there, stay out, construction equipment. It's dark. I don't even see where I'm going, but I'm not that far. I'm not that far. I only have a little ways to go before I can get to the entrance to my subdivision. So what did I do? I kept going. I went around the sign. I kept going, and I fell in a hole. That's the response I get every time when I tell the story. Now, it was a pretty big hole, and there were cars right there, and out of embarrassment, I just hopped right back out, and I just kept running. I kept running. I made it home. I was all bloodied and bruised and scraped up on my arms and on my legs, and, Christy's like, what in the world happened to you? And the next day, I am driving out, and I look over, and I see the hole there, and it was a pretty big hole. I also see pieces of rebar like sticking up from the ground. I mean, it could have been a lot worse for me. Thankfully, it wasn't. But often the dangers lurking ahead as we go throughout life are way more serious than that. And oftentimes they have longer lasting consequences. So, are you prudent or are you simple? Do you look to the future or do you always live in the moment? Do you realize that your decisions of today have an impact on tomorrow? Do you usually decide ahead of time? Or do you wait until the danger arrives? Do you understand that waiting until danger has arrived is often too late to decide? And do you take precautions? Do you take the necessary precautions? Or are you just used to suffering the consequences? Dealing with those consequences when they arrive and looking back with regret. Can you see that it's so much better to avoid the danger altogether? Here are some other questions that I think we should wrestle with this week. You can think about these. You can talk to a family member or in your community group about these questions. But the first one's this: have you determined your destination? This is an important question, and oftentimes I don't think about this. But where do you want to be this time next year? Where do you want to be in 5 years from now? Where do you want to be 10 years from now? At the end of your life, where do you want to be relationally? Especially relationally, and with your parenting, and in your marriage, and with your family members. Are you able to slow down enough to evaluate where you want to be? What's your destination? Especially in your spiritual life and your walk with the Lord, have you determined your destination? What dangers do you foresee along the path? This takes knowing the dangers. This takes knowing where the dangers may lie on your path. This takes knowing yourself, knowing where you're weak. And then finally, what precautions can you put in place? What precautions can you put in place? How can you make sure that you arrive safely, that you arrive where you want to go? And maybe this will take, in fact, for all of us, it will take accountability. It will take the iron sharpening iron that Brian talked with us about last week. It's so important. In fact, it's going to take applying all these things that we've been learning about in Proverbs. The way of wisdom. It's going to take having the foundation of the fear of the Lord and trusting Him with all of our heart and leaning not on our own understanding and submitting to Him. It's going to take guarding our hearts. It's going to take these walls of self-control that can only come through the Holy Spirit at work in our lives, leading us and guiding us. And so right now, if you say, I've suffered lots of consequences, and I often look back with regret. Here's what you need to know. You can start over. You can head in a new direction. But that can only happen through the grace of Jesus, through the forgiveness of Jesus, through the mercy of Jesus and what He has done for you. And it can only happen through His Spirit at work in your life, guiding and directing your path. So the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. So for the last time, are you prudent or are you simple? Let's pray together. God, we thank you so much for your word, for the opportunity that we've had this morning to be together. to look at these words in Proverbs. I pray that you'll just use this time right now to speak to each one of us through your Spirit. How should we respond? I mean, life and relationships are so valuable. You've blessed us with these things. So help us to be good stewards of the lives that you have given. Help us to be good stewards of the relationships that we have. Help us to learn through your word and through your Spirit at work in our lives to make wise choices. Help us to know how to respond. Help us to know what our next step is, what our next move is, and help us to submit to you. In Jesus' name, amen.